Um, I we're talking about a subject that I never thought that any museum or scholar would ever have any interest in punk rock. And uh, this was a music genre that I discovered when I was a teenager, growing up just south of Cedar Rapids in a small town called Ely. It's about as big as its name. And during that time, the internet was in its infancy. We didn't have Facebook or any of these things. I think the closest thing to social media was like LiveJournal and like the early version of blogs. Um, and I would learn about shows um, by going to these local record stores. One was Relics Records in Cedar Rapids, which is now long gone. And then there was a couple used places Disco Round, or I think that's what it was called, and then CD Warehouse. And I would go and see these handmade flyers, very similar to the ones that you see on the opening page here. And um, as most of you, if you're in Des Moines or any of the larger cities, we have what you call like venues that are specific for music, such as Gabe's in Iowa City, Lefties here in Des Moines or XBK, Octopus in Cedar Falls. Um, you know, in Cedar Rapids, we really didn't have that. We had um, community centers and basements and one of the most sketchy ones I like to remember is the advanced blasting, which was a sandblasting warehouse, and we would clear out the upstairs office. That was like a crow's nest office. So you had to climb up these very rickety stairs to get there, clear it out, and a band would play there. Very dangerous. I mean, at any moment the thing could have collapsed and it would all be over. But that world to me was always fascinating because these bands that my friends had back then, no one was trying to pierce the veil or break out of Iowa or do anything really. It was people making music to share with your friends. And that's a mentality that has carried on through over the years. Um, Sort of art for art's sake, I guess. But it was kind of something to do, and it was something creative that I mean, I wasn't at the time, I wouldn't consider myself musically inclined. I still don't consider myself very musically inclined. But everything felt approachable. Um, and when I moved out of Iowa in 2004, I moved to Denver for college, and I got kind of roped into the scene that was happening there. Um, I would often tell stories about the Iowa punk rock scene because in larger cities like Denver, there was always bands happening, bands that you would see them do some local shows for a couple years and then they would break out, they would get signed to a label. I was very involved by that point, kind of involved in the metal scene there, and bands were taking themselves very seriously, almost too seriously. And I always missed this idea of going to see my friends play shows. So just kind of structure here. This was a very hard thing to get into. I've been doing Iowa basement tapes since 2018, and we could get into a lot of nitty gritty of everything from fanzines to whatever. But I picked a couple eras that we're going to really focus on, and I believe, if I remember correctly, I picked two bands, one to two bands per era, and there's a couple one-offs that I want to talk about, and we're gonna relate to them to like the kind of the time frame that they were happening. So, anyways, we'll get into this. All right. Iowa basement tapes. So Iowa basement tapes. I when I would be working in LA back in 2015, 2016, I worked on shows like The Bachelor and a bunch of other junk. Um, I would be out in LA for about a month, sometimes even 2 months at a time. I remember in 2016, I think I spent 122 days in LA altogether. Um, and I, at one point, was even considering moving there full time. And I remember on Sundays I would listen to KCRW, which is an NPR station in Los Angeles. And on Sundays you could hear Henry Rollins do his 2 hour radio show. Um, I don't even know if he actually had a title for the program, but I know that the description was from punk to funk, and he would play all sorts of stuff. Some things that were considered mainstream, some things that were a little more avant-garde. And he would make this playlist that he would post on Twitter every Sunday afternoon after his show would play. He'd say, "Here's the playlist," and he would have like, "This is the band, this is the song, this is the album, this is where they're from." If there's a link to Bandcamp or wherever, because Bandcamp was like really kicking into gear at that time. And um, when I decided I would continue to go to LA for work, but I still found myself always wanting to go back to Iowa, specifically back to Des Moines. Um, I I kept thinking, is there a way that I could do something similar? Um, First off, in Des Moines, maybe broader into some different cities where I could play music, stuff that I kind of grew up with in the punk scene, and then newer stuff, because punk never dies. Um, as long as there is some disruption in the world, whether it be political or any type of civil disruption or civil unrest, there will be punk rock, and we will get into that specifically here in a few minutes. But in 2018, actually, let me back up a little bit. In 2012, I wrote a blog called Iowa Music Buzz with a couple people. Just recently, I was on a car ride back from McGregor, Iowa, with my longtime collaborator Dylan Sires, and we were talking about the Iowa Music Buzz days, and some interviews I still had from back then. And because a lot of that stuff has been long lost, and uh, I had an interview with a couple people, one person who specifically had passed away in the last 5 years, Amy Badger, who was part of the band Son of the Morning and Love Songs for Lonely Monsters. And I also had an interview with a longtime friend, Ben Smith, who goes by the name Ben Smasher. He also has a YouTube channel called Brain Smasher. We met when I was in high school. I was 17, it was like 2003. He was a couple years older than me, and he had started a music archive called 319 Dude, which he had taken all those old demos and CDRs and tapes that we had collected back in that era. So like 2001, maybe, I mean, for him, probably a little bit earlier. So like 98, 99 till about 2005, and digitized them and made this Bandcamp archive, which I will show you here a little bit later, called 319 Dude. And we went and we did this podcast for Iowa Music Buzz where he talked about the reasons why he archived it. And his whole thing was, I do it because no one else cares, and I do. And when we played the songs, I realized, you know what, I also care about this. This was a time and a place, and really, there's nothing. Iowa's punk rock scene itself, and even the music that was coming out. Yes, there's similar styles all over the place. Every town, every state has some type of punk rock being cultivated. But Iowa was very specific, and Cedar Rapids was very specific because, again, no one was trying to break out. They were just writing these songs to play with their friends. Um, and so in 2018, I've been a longtime fan of KFMG here in Des Moines, small radio station. They used to be out of the Hotel Fort Des Moines. They broadcast on the top floor. They are now over at Mainframe, and they've been very supportive of my film career over the years. Gary Monty and Ron Sorensen, and I decided that I was going to try and put together a demo show um, of what this could be. I had the name Iowa Basement Tapes, and on just in my home office, recorded a show, figured out a format, and and basically just like pulled all these CDs and tapes that I had, and then downloaded some that Ben had archived, and was able to uh, uh, basically have this demo show, and I presented it to KFMG. And when I did the playlist, I made sure to, of course, you have the band, the title of the song, the album, but then also I was starting to put where all these people were coming from. And there would be bands from Cedar Falls, Waterloo, Mason City, of course, Iowa City, and Des Moines, the Quad Cities, Ottumwa. And that's where it all kind of clicked, that it really kind of connected all of this stuff that was happening or had happened. Um, so we had our first show broadcast July 5th, 2018, here in Des Moines. A year later, we expanded. Siouxland Public Media, which is Sioux City and Okoboji, 90.3 and 90.7 picked us up. And then over the years, we have also been syndicated on Co-College's college radio station. 2 years ago, Decorah up in KWIC picked us up as well. And we also have the podcast archives, which is slightly different than the actual radio broadcast. And then in 2020, during the pandemic, decided to start archiving this material myself to share with the world, joining the other two Iowa music archives, 319 Dude and the Quad City Music Archive. So we're going to talk about a couple different eras in punk rock and how kind of Iowa relates to it. The Vietnam, post-Vietnam, the Reagan years, the George W. Bush, which was the era that I kind of grew up in, and then post-COVID. And post-COVID is sort of, I would say 2020 to now, because I have noticed that the activity is really ramped up, specifically in Iowa with Iowa City and Des Moines. The 90s had its own thing. A lot, early LGBTQ stuff was happening with Don't Ask, Don't Tell. That did influence quite a bit. But really, I mean, it wasn't even really on my radar until the Bush era. I mean, Reagan era is easy. Vietnam's easy. The George W. Bush era, I mean, my birthday is 9/11. So, 2001, I turned 16. And that's kind of one of those times you kind of just become hyper aware of what's going on. Never thought that now I'm going to be 40 this year, would be alive to have seen so many world events happen and seeing the almost like drastic changes in both culture and media and how the reactions that come out of it. But it's also, not that I want bad things to happen, but when these things do happen, it does instigate creativity and responses. Iowa's first punk band. And I want to be very clear that there was some things happening before this in the 60s, but they were much more of the surf guitar, garage rock, not as as you can see here, as outgoing and aggressive as the Dogs. And of all places, Decorah, Iowa, 1973. Jody Koenig, who you see here with the long hair and wearing the dog collar on the image on the right, his dad owned the local radio station KDEC, and they would get a lot of promos and a lot of rock and roll that was coming out. So he was getting it was like fresh ears for him. And one of the bands, and I honestly, when I was putting this presentation together, I should have known this already, but I've often described the Dogs as Iowa's answer to the Stooges. And in fact, I found an old website, like an old GeoCities type website on archive.org that had an interview with one of the members, and they named the band after "I Want to Be Your Dog" by the Stooges. This was an album that I found while I was researching music for Basement Tapes, because I had all the super loud, screamy stuff. I knew there was other material out there, and the Dogs, I remember I found this is the positive of file sharing websites, or not file sharing websites, but pirating. Because I grew up in the era of Napster and that was how we found music. If you couldn't afford to just go out and buy CDs, you just steal it, and that eventually you would probably, if you liked it, it would lead to purchasing. And I found their 7-inch and their record on Soulseek, and it's incredible. It's an incredible record, very much like the Stooges. Um, I don't know. They have I've heard they have had reunions and I've missed them. It's the problem with the information era that we're in. There's always so much going on, and sometimes you don't learn about it until it's happened. Um, but this band to me is very special. I'm going to play a song here for you all. This is off the Rot and Roll 7-inch. All right. I was looking at the time, and as much as I would love to play that entire song, we do not have time to do that. One last note. So this is definitely that post-Vietnam era. And there was a little note here that I found, because originally Jody Koenig was extremely inspired by Hendrix. However, the Stooges were just that much easier to play. Oh, they want to do that again. Okay. Now we're hitting into Des Moines. This is the late 70s. White Lunch. Unfortunately, I do not have audio of this band. I do have video of what they eventually became on my next slide here. But White Lunch, Charlie Chesterman, who this is probably a very controversial statement. I would say would be the person who brought punk rock to Des Moines. I met with Max Steinfeld, who eventually would be in their next incarnation, which was first called actually the Law, which some of you might be aware of, with the King Size Cigarette. But Charlie had gone to the UK and came back with a bunch of records, stuff like the Sex Pistols, the Sharks, and played them for his friends, which eventually would have led to the forming of this band, White Lunch. Now, I believe I've emailed Eric Coleman a few times, and there might be some recordings that exist that have not seen the light of day. And I have talked to him about not only White Lunch, but also the Law, and being able to kind of do an exclusive first time view for the entire world on Iowa Basement Tapes. But I had done an article a couple years ago for City View about punk rock coming to Iowa, and I met with Mac over at Grounds for Celebration, and he showed me this article, which is just an unbelievable picture to see. And Charlie, he went by the name Charlie Suicide for a while when he was doing this. Um, he unfortunately, I believe he passed away in 2013. So I never got to meet him because at that time they just were not on my radar. So here's the law. And I have this video. They were actually High Society. That was the name I was trying to think of, and my brain shut down. High Society was their first name. And then they changed it to the law. Mac had sent this to me. I'm going to play this. I'm going to probably speed this up because I think we only got about 15 more minutes, but this is definitely a gem. If you're a fan of like the Smithereens, this is not your hardcore punk that is come here very shortly. This is punk in the sense of like the late 70s, early 80s. I use the Smithereens as a good example because they kind of fall into that, but they were not as they're not as loud as these some of these bands would eventually be. And this is in Des Moines, by the way.
Ready to go? God, it's an annoyance.
Right. I highly recommend checking that out. Sorry, they weren't called High Society. That was the show. Okay, this is a very important part of this whole punk rock story in Iowa, Southeast Records and these two Iowa compilations. This was also I discovered through the pirating, um, uh, both these comps, and it took me a very, very long time to track these down. Um, volume one, which is actually on the right in the black and white cover, I had to go to Chicago and hustle a guy for that. And then this other one on the left, it's another Iowa compilation, the Uncharted Territories. A buddy of mine was moving back to Los Angeles, and he gave me a copy of it. That the Uncharted Territories is probably my favorite out of this whole era. This compilation, um, this is really the first time we saw any type of organization within that kind of that more DIY music scene. And started in Iowa City. The label itself would, I believe, end probably early 90s. They went on and did a couple of tape compilations, such as High as a Knife. And But they would pass on the actual the Iowa compilation name, and other labels would continue to put it out. They ended up doing six total, only two on LP. These two, I consider them the holy grails of like the '80s Iowa punk era. They're not. I guess I wouldn't say they're as rare as some stuff that was put out on tape or whatever. But the collection itself is a gem. This is where you're going to start seeing stuff like the Holloman, and you're going to start hearing House of Large Sizes. Um, and I was sitting at Octopus Bar up in Cedar Falls one night, having a beer with Dave Diebler, and he kind of told me a little bit about this, about what was going on. And he said you had to, I think it was like $300, and back then $300 to be a part of this compilation, that's a lot of money for a band. Um, and but at the same time, it put every single band on there kind of like on people's radars. Unfortunately, some of the bands, this is the only thing that's out there of them. And I've been looking for material for a lot of these groups. Another highlight from this, which I'm going to play, is a band called Movable Feast, who are out of Des Moines. In fact, the very first Iowa Basement Tapes show opened up with "End of the World." Um, and every time we have like an anniversary or a birthday, I try to um, enter the show with that song again. And a couple of the guys from the band had reached out to me after listening to the show, and they had sent me 7 inches. They've sent me bootlegs of the band playing at the Laughing Iguana back when that was open, and So Was Your Mother, some old clubs that were here in Des Moines. Um, I'm gonna play this. I'm gonna actually play the Movable Feast song "Into the World" here before we move on. But um, these two, if there's anything of Iowa's history in DIY, punk rock, whatever, it really starts with these two records. All right. That was a Movable Feast with End of the World. All right. This one, probably the most famous from this era. Most of you who are tuning in probably know who this band is, House of Large Sizes. Dave Diebler, still around. The band itself, I guess you could say, is probably still around in a form. They do some one-offs. But Cedar Falls in 1986, and they were still very DIY for a long time. Those first 10 years. In fact, one of my favorite releases of theirs, One Big Cake, with the song What If There's a Fire, which was also on that same Iowa compilation volume 2, probably my favorite from that era. In 94, they did sign to Columbia and we're still putting out records for several years. I got to see them perform for I believe it was GDP, if you guys remember GDP, the gross domestic product, probably 2012, maybe 2011, somewhere in there. And they played at Vaudeville Muse in that same night. Amadeo Rossi came out and said that they had just agreed to play 8035, and I think they played at least once, if not more. But Dave had something very interesting to say to me, that back in the early 90s, and I have this quote here, they could play a show in Cedar Rapids, and that one show would pay for their next record. So if you think about that, when tickets for, I bet House of Large Size would say $10 most in Cedar Rapids at a smaller, like a bar venue or whatever, that's all it took. The fact that there was this population that could feed a band in that way is pretty incredible to even think about. And I highly recommend any of you who are in Cedar Falls, you guys are lucky, you can pop into the Octopus anytime. But if you are ever in Cedar Falls, I highly recommend going to Octopus over in College Hill, and you might see Dave pictured right here in this video, which we're about to play, having a beer, and just he loves to talk about the old days. This kind of takes us out of that Reagan era, and if I know I'm moving fast. That Reagan era, the reason why, for the younger people that are listening, there was that first type of, like, there was this moral code that was being preached, and the war on drugs was really prominent during that time. And there is this idea of control that was kind of being forced upon people, and how we behave, and et cetera. You know what I mean? I mean, also AIDS is happening. It's this whole eye on things that almost like privacy is being invaded in a lot of ways. So I'm gonna play this. This is I didn't get a chance to see what year this was from, but this was on Iowa Public Television, and another old rocker, Bob Dorr, introduces them, play on Iowa Public Television.
We've invited our friend Bob Dorr of KUNI Radio to introduce the bigger-than-life sound of the musical group we're spotlighting this week, the House of Large Sizes. Bob?
Thanks, Morgan. House of Large Sizes is from my hometown area in Iowa, the Cedar Valley, Waterloo, Cedar Falls. Husband-wife team Dave Diebler and Barb Schilf have kept the band together since the mid-'80s and are currently joined by drummer Brent Hansen, who lives in Minneapolis when he's not on the road with the House. I think that for the style of music they play, Dave Diebler is the best and most prolific songwriter I know. With these witty, savvy, rhythmic, energetic songs, these three people have traveled coast to coast and have had an album out on one of the world's largest labels, Columbia Records. Yet they've remained down-to-earth, real business people who operate a vintage and alternative clothing store in Cedar Falls, and most recently have taken on the project of bringing a low-power community radio station to the Cedar Falls area. What more can I say? The House is in the house. House of Large Sizes and lightning rod salesman. Turn it up. Let's rock.
The satellites are waiting patiently in space, taking naps for soldiers who plan on rolling in. I've got no line with protection. reflection, no one to see for me. I am Christopher Columbus, changing everything. Yes, you know me as the left side starts to cave. Right, there is movement, but it's all so vague. Run a light, I think I saw an accident right I got a line with reception, clear channels failing us. The sirens singing songs you have to sing along. Okay. The writing's clearly jumping off the wall. Just being someplace else will not be good for long. So I want to tell you that I love you so. These things keep moving, we will never know. No time to write, no time to write. It's dead to rights, and the snow is coming down.
We do got to move
We've
on.
invited our
Okay, we're jumping ahead. 1998, and this is sort of around the time that things started becoming on my radar personally. A band called Vida Blue formed in Iowa City, and a gentleman by the name of Matthew Davis, there with the dreadlocks and the glasses, hit the scene. One of the most prolific artists that I have ever had the chance to indulge in his art. Now, this is obviously before. This is definitely before the George W. Bush era, but it definitely leans into it. This is a really interesting time when the term screamo and what we would have called hardcore. You know, before this, hardcore was usually referenced to Black Flag and bands of similar nature, or I don't know. I mean, it's hard to even say that now because we have gotten into this time now with the I don't want to call the acts violent, but they're very expressive. And Vida Blue, which was named after the baseball player, they eventually they were playing a gig in San Francisco, and another band said, "We really like your name. We'd like to buy it," and they bought it for 10 grand, and continued on until unfortunately Matt Davis died in 2003. There's a really great documentary out there, and I was going to include the clip, but the clip I wanted I could no longer find. It's called Afro Punks, and it talks about his era of living in just a house of just this community house in Iowa City in the early 90s. I found the trailer, but I could not find the actual clip with him in the house with a bunch of other dudes living in the house with him. I highly recommend it. It's a great film. You know, that the one of the common things, especially with the bands like this, especially guys and the folks that were in like in their early 20s, a lot of them would live in squatter houses, or even we just call them punk houses. We had a couple of them in CR. I know Des Moines had several. Haunted Basement, which was not that long ago, probably 15 years ago, it existed. But I'm gonna play this clip from 10 grand, and probably not as long as these other ones. This has some plays a song, and then it kind of has them on tour here.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for all day being chilling this place.
Man, I wish we could listen to that whole thing right now. Okay. Getting into what's going on today. This band probably should be on everyone's radar, especially because one of them, Oliver Wayland, is part of Iowa City's city council, just won that election. I don't know if I really need to get into too much. I mean, we're all here, we're all alive, we're all aware of the world around us right now, and so many things echo. I would say echo both pieces of the Reagan years and pieces of the W years. And I feel like boot camp represents quite a bit, and the fact that even now, with the types of civil unrest that we have, that someone like Oliver, who is very prolific, is kind of standing between two circles, and both. And for those of you who don't know him, that's him right here with the hat. That he can still be doing his art and still promoting music and art in Iowa City, but also take a stand and represent his community. I'm probably going to skip the video on this one, and just because of time here, and I want to make sure that if anyone wants to talk afterwards that we can. So, but the band after this, I want to speak about very current, I should say, PSYOP. With Dolly Speed, trans woman who started Pokey's Records and Pokey's Fest. If I want to say that, I don't think I need to say that it's a political motivated, just like boot camp. But Dolly's very interesting. Dolly was born in Fairfield, Iowa, moved to Iowa City, and has really taken a leadership role with not just having, being in bands, but starting this label and starting a music festival that is widely attended. And it remains extremely DIY. I might play a little tune here, and then we'll move on to this last little bit.
We are China! Iowa City! We have you in our side!
think you guys get the message. This last one is kind of important to me, and I'm going to lead into it real quickly. I have said on Iowa Basement Tapes that this next band, to me, is probably the most important band currently active in Iowa. Some might call me crazy, including members of said band. Captain Three Leg, Iowa's oldest punk band that started in 1995 in a summer in 1995 in Ottumwa, Iowa. Still active, still putting out music. They are celebrating their 30th anniversary this year, and rumor has it they are going to be doing a show here. Here we go. Hold on, I'm going to go back. Sorry, I hit it twice and it went. It played both songs. So let me try this again. One of the things I want to talk about this band, I first heard about them. I was actually living in Colorado and at a record store, Twist and Shout, and going through their 7-inch 45s. And I found it was this band called CSSO, Japanese grindcore, a very specific genre. And I looked at it, I picked it up, I knew who the band was, and I saw that the record label, it said Mortville Noise, Ottumwa, Iowa. And my head exploded. I'm like, first off, I know where Ottumwa is. The fact that there's a label or anything or even knowledge of this music in that part of this world blew my mind. And I had been at this point 2-3 years out of living in Iowa, living in Denver, and found this. And it wasn't until probably 2015 or 2016 that I started communicating with Andy. I probably talk to him every day now. And being as prolific as they are, almost 100 releases. They actually have 94 out now. Number 95 is at the pressing plant as we speak, as this presentation is happening. The label is still going strong. Very, very, very active. I've been actually, if anyone knows how this can happen, I've been trying to get them inducted in the Iowa Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I don't know who to talk to. I've talked to some people, but they say that they do not handle that jurisdiction. So I also want to say they're not just this punk rock, noisecore, whatever. They have also put out records that are jazz. They put out bluegrass. They also put out a prog piece that I'm going to play right here real fast. I play this band almost every week on Iowa Basement Tapes because I can play any song of theirs and it'll be completely different to anything else that I've previously played of theirs. Amazing musicians, and I will say they're not really from any era. I mean, 95, they were kind of that Gen X, and they just continued and said, like, we're not gonna have a bunch of different bands. We're just gonna pour it all into this one project, and they have been going strong ever since. I highly recommend, if you ever want to go back through the old Iowa Basement Tapes archives, the interview with Andy Kettle is absolutely one of my favorites. So, all right. See, lastly, I just want to give you guys a couple resources. So not only is the Iowa Basement Tapes archives, but there is also 319 Dude, which is, I believe, is the OG Iowa archive out there, and also the Quad City Music Archive. The 319 Dude was started by Ben Smith, aka Ben Smasher, on the socials, and then the Quad City Music Archive was started by John Burns, who used to be in the band Meth and Goats, you've probably seen several flyers with their names on it throughout this presentation. So okay. I guess this is probably the time, if we have like 1 minute, I guess. If anyone wants to ask any questions, or however we want to do this, those from our people over at Iowa Historical Society HQ.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Kristian, so much for this. It was great. Thanks for, glad we got the sound figured out too. It was awesome to hear those things. So we are a little short of time. We'll do a couple questions. So we had this question come through. It says, in the sub headline on the article about one of the bands, said that neighbors complained about the loud music. Did early punk bands in Iowa meet much community resistance or problems that you're aware of?
I think in the sense of like local neighborhood, like turn it down. I mean, I think more people probably saw it as an opportunity, especially when it comes to like venues, because they're, I'm not sure if any of you have seen Decline of Western Civilization. There is obviously like an immediate reaction of like, oh, this is too aggressive for us, or this is too loud. But then other people who are very entrepreneurial say like, oh, hey, we're gonna have a venue that will play this because now we know there's an audience for it. So I would say yes, and from first hearing it, and I heard a lot of stories about bands over in Creston, of all places, that included like the Mutts, which is if it wasn't for Captain Three, like they would probably have carried the crown of Iowa's oldest punk band. But that's about as all as I would probably say on that front.
Okay, great, Kristian. And we're going to do one more question. This will be our last one just because of time's sake. This is like looking forward, I guess, kind of. Do you have any upcoming projects and or like research that you are working on that you would like to share about?
I am working with Michaela Cashman, who I collaborate on a lot of like my commercial work, and we are doing a website for Iowa Basement Tapes, which is probably needed to happen probably 5 years ago, and just never thought it would still be going on for this long. But that website, in regards to this project, is I've been collecting a lot of show flyers and stories from people that maybe won't want to come on the show, but are interested in writing about it. And then there is some sponsored events coming up on, this has moved. It was supposed to be May 22nd. It's now May 29th. Iowa Basement Tapes will be presenting Decline of Western Civilization over at the Varsity here in Des Moines. And I will be creating some pre-show content that's going to be kind of a mixtape of live performances. Some of the stuff you probably saw today, some stuff that that's out there that hasn't been seen. I know Andy Kettle of Captain Three Lakes says he has some archives that are still literally on the original high 8 tape medium that I'm going to cut and try to put some of that stuff out there.
Great, thanks for sharing that. I lied. We're going to do one more question. This one just came in. So do you see any references to Iowa-specific politics or economics in any of the 70s or 80s groups? For example, like the farm crisis or anything?
I think farm crisis, not necessarily, because there was probably fewer bands happening in rural Iowa, and a lot of these people were kids. So it may not have necessarily been on their radar. There was a compilation. There used to be a record label out of Iowa City called Useless, I believe, and there was a compilation. Man, I cannot think about what it was called. And there was a band, I believe it was either Mr. Clean is what their name was, and they were very much referencing Waterloo and some of the racial issues that were happening in Waterloo at the time. I would say that's probably it. I mean, currently now, obviously PSYOP and Boot Camp are addressing current events, but not so much, I would say, like the farm crisis. I would say it's more related to probably like AIDS, and AIDS really wasn't even on the punk rock radar at that time as it is now. There was that phase of late 90s where queer was actually part of the punk scene. And even then there was still a lot of separation back in the 80s. So, but good question though.
Awesome. Great, Kristian. So with that answer, we will bring this webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone joining us today. And we would like to extend our last thank you to our presenter, Kristian, and all of his knowledge. We hope everyone will sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that take place on the second and fourth Thursdays throughout the year. There are many great stories to tell in the upcoming months, just like this one. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history? You can find and watch over 90 recorded webinars of past 101 programs on the Iowa History YouTube channel. We look forward to virtually seeing you for the next special Iowa History 101 webinar on May 8th. The topic will be Bullets, Booze, and a Noose, a Sioux County Prohibition Story. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great afternoon.